welcome to another meeting sa GAMPRG3. For today, we'll just talk about introduction to code architecture. So before I start, reminders lang, um, yung mga hindi pa, yung mga projects na hindi capstone, uh, kailangan nyo i-send muna yung HCD bago nyo i-start yung milestone para ma-check ko kung okay naman yung game nyo. And then after na give the thumbs up, then you can create your milestones na for you to check. Sorry, for you to have it checked na rin by me. Para ma-check ko kung even out naman yung milestones no. Yung mga capstone naman, I guess uh, start pa lang ng term so wala pa kayong milestones. Unless meron kayo. So kung meron kayong milestones na for your capstone, I would like to check it out na rin. Right? So, yun lang naman. May concern ba or may clarifications na kailangan? None? Sige, kung wala, then we can proceed with our lecture. So, ayun, introduction to code architecture. So before we start, let's talk about language agnosticism. So, what does it mean to be agnostic? Anyone? Ano meaning ng agnostic? Open to possibility? Pwede. Oo. Something like that. Kapag agnostic ka, it's not that you don't believe, nor do you believe in like a god or higher being. It's more of parang you don't have the evidence or to support na meron or wala. So, parang there is siguro pero there's no evidence na there is. So that's being agnostic. So, when it means the language agnosticism, it refers to yung aspect of programming. Yeah, tama. Last guess. So yun nga. Parang refers to parang the aspects of programming that are independent of any specific programming language. Kaya no matter na anong coding language na gagamitin nyo, such as C++, C Sharp, or Blueprint Visual Scripting, or I don't know, Python, ano pa ba naman language na aral nyo sa IMC, they all work on the same concept and foundation. So, being agnostic, you do not know nga about God. Wala tayong evidence. So, something that is language agnostic does not need to know about the language they are using, yet they still are functional. So, as long as you have a foundation in programming, you should not have too much of a problem when switching programming languages or platforms. So, code architecture is language agnostic, but how it is applied varies between programming languages and platforms, such as Unity or Unreal. So, what is code architecture? So, it is an art of programming, the gracious, elegant, and effective way of programming. Pero bakit? Because in order to have good code architecture in your program, you must have the right discipline for it. And it takes real effort to implement and maintain it. Ganun talaga. So, code architecture requires planning ahead in order to maintain continuous updates in your application. So, imagine programming a game, inputting thousands of lines of code, and then yung designer nyo decides to change yung design or maybe add additional functions to a feature. So, with good architecture, doing yung changes na yun wouldn't really affect all the system. Ang apektado lang naman is yung system na kailangan palitan or i-update. So now you must plan ahead as well to smoothly work with other programmers. So when another programmer reads yung code nyo, they must be able to understand it right away. So pagpasa pa lang nila ng code, okay, yun pa rin yung ginagawa. Yun yung maganda. If hindi yung ganun, not only would it take them some time, pero may chance na di pa nila nagigets yun. Right. And finally, planning ahead prevents bugs and would make it easy to pinpoint bugs. However, implementation varies greatly depending on requirements and platform. So your code architecture in a bullet hell game may not be the same sa RPG game. Iba yung architecture nun. So as code architecture is an art, it is rather subjective. So two programmers may have implemented two different kinds of architectures in the same game. Questions? No? Gets naman. So, continuing from OOP. So, we separate and encapsulate program logic into classes, if naalam nyo. So, if you remember OOP, we create classes where the functions and the use of it is strictly related to the classes itself. Like in the health class, di ba naalala nyo may take damage or may heal. So, in health class, you only have public getters and for the health, dapat wala kayong public setter kasi kapag may public setter, that means, mali mo sa ibang sa ibang programmers, that means, oh, I can manually set the health. So, better na getter lang yung health para yung mga pag-damage or pag-heal, yun yung mga functions na pwede i-call. So, in OP, we can inherit to make objects polymorphic. So, these objects may be separated. They still are part of a larger whole and need to communicate. So, code architecture describes how separate objects communicate with each other to form a system. So, ito. Why do we need it? So, meron tayong criteria. Yung sa programming as an art. Tapos, this is made in 2019 ata or 18. So, medyo may YOLO pa nun. So, kapag criteria na development time, kapag RT programming nyo, programming as an art, it may be slow sa start, pero yung progress nyo should be a bit faster in the long run. Kasi, yung code nyo, you're able to make it so that it will be easier for you later on. Na hindi kayo parang kailangan imano-mano ulit i-code for newer functions or something, right? Or kapag hindi siya art, mabilis siya sa una. Just like in Game Jam, kung na-experience nyo. Pero, namamatay siya sa long run. Kasi, parang, ang dami mong ugly code. Ang dami mong, pangit na code sa start na di mo magamit sa iba. In the end, you're gonna have to recode. So, yun. Next, required experience. So, para maging maganda yung code nyo, kailangan may mastery ka sa programming basics. And kung hindi siya art, ang dami mong if-else, may mga Hadouken kayo na, no, if-else, mga nested if-else, mga ganun. So, if you can write it, you're good to go. Next, kapag, let's say, may bagong version na ng, ng class, like, let's say, instead of si enemy, may upgraded version ng enemy. So, kung maganda yung code nyo, madali lang i-ayusin yun. You just have to move some functions or stuff, maybe override some functions, and you're good to go. Pero, kapag minadali niyo yun, na parang game jam, mahirap because hindi mo na naisip. You wouldn't have thought of kung ano kaya ipapublic ko or ano dapat i-set ko na ganun. Right? Mahirap siya. So, kapag fixing bugs, kapag maganda yung code nyo, most bugs are localized to where it is happening. So, during lang sa system nyo, dun lang nyo iayusin usually. Yung nga lang, kapag minadali nyo, kung wala kayong na follow na code architecture, mahirap. Mahirap pag-fix ng bugs. You end up trying to fix one system to another. Baka nga. Nangyari na yun, I've experienced it, hindi siya masaya. Especially kapag capstone na yun and then last day of submission na yun. Nangyari na yun. Then, collecting bugs naman, uh, same thing. Madali lang. Kasi you know where it is coming from. Right? You know where it is coming from. Madali lang hanapin yun. And you can find out how to fix it and all. Yung nga lang kapag walang code architecture whatever, you have to trace it to so many places. If not trace it, yung error, yung bug na yun, parang kung saan na siya nanggaling. Let's say nga yung experience niyo sa C++, right? Dahil mga sa bug nyo, kung saan na nanggaling yung error na yun, hanapin nyo pa. Parang ganun, right? So, to answer kay Vasquez, yes, recorded. Alam ko, in-upload ko na yung ibang recording sa Big Sky. Right? Any questions here? Wala. May dito na experience ng game jam. Anyone? Alright. Yung iba. So, may mga first time mag game jam. Kung gusto nyo, actually, di naman kailangan eh. I mean, if you wanna, I could give bonus points for kapag nag-attend kayo ng game jam na medyo gusto nga nila ng mga students. Kung gusto nyo mag-game jam. Yung nga lang, may mga capstone dito eh. So, up to you guys. But we can have some bonus points here. Di nyo kailangan, actually, kayo. Good idea? Bad idea? Gusto nyo ba mag-game jam? Yeah, yeah. That's what I thought. Yeah. I'd recommend it sa ibang subjects pero siguro dito dahil mga nagka-capstone na. Yeah. Okay. So ayun. So if you've experienced game jam, that's where sobrang pangit ng code nyo. But only because you're limited to only 3 days. So understandable na ito mangyayari na sobrang pangit ng code nyo and sobrang inefficient. But kind of normal given the time frame. As long as you have time to fix everything and all, magiging art siya. Okay? So, here we go. Abstraction. So, abstraction, medyo important siya. So, it is making an object hide its implementation and present itself as something abstract. Abstract meaning it can be anything. It can become actually, hindi lang siya. It can become everything and it can become anything, right? So, we only know a bit about the object. So, abstraction only cares about what an object can do instead of what an object is. So, if you remember your item class or object class, ang nalagay lang natin doon sa GAMPRG 2 and GAMPRG 1, if you remember. Ang nalagay natin is on hit or on pickup, right? We didn't care what the object is, but we given the functions in the name, we know what the object can do. Right? Very small uh, example. Kasi in the end, if you remember GAMPRG 1 sa Outbreak, ang nangyari was, ang pick up natin naging pag-pick up rin ng weapon, tsaka pag-pick up rin ng mga buffs. Right? So, yun yung kaganda ng abstraction because it can become anything can become everything, and everything can become anything. And that's just one of the things. And itong si Solid, ang Solid Principles, important din siya sa architecture. So, what is Solid? Solid is just a mnemonic acronym for the 5 software design principles. So it aims to make code more understandable, flexible, and maintainable. Serves as guidelines for proper abstraction. So, ang solid here, S for singular responsibility principle, O is for open or closed principles, L is for Liskov substitution principle, I is for interface segregation principle, and D, dependency inversion principles. So, ito mga to, di nyo kailangan memorize, pero you may have been following this. The word is may have. We're not 100% sure. Pero, yun nga, design principles. So first things first, ano ba yung difference ng design principles at saka design patterns? So in design principles, it represents a set of guidelines. So guidelines lang siya. It's not something na you have to follow. So it helps us lang to avoid bad design. And it's something that it doesn't give any concrete answer or solution. However, see design pattern, it is a repeatable solution to a commonly repeating problem. It is a concrete solution to a problem. For example, ang design pattern, si object pooling. If you guys know what object pooling is, that is a solution to uh, multiple pag-spawn ng item, quote unquote. Right? When it comes to bullet hell games, a design pattern that can be used there is object pooling so that hindi maglalag yung computer when trying to spawn thousands of bullets. That's a design pattern. Another design pattern would be singleton. Singleton is a kind of design pattern, which is a solution to having to get having to get certain like manager scripts somehow instead of trying to uh, manually what do you call this manually connected to to a class. You can use singleton to para may way ka to have access to the managers. So that's just another thing. However, ang design pattern, it's solid. Yan yung solid principles. Those are design patterns. The design principles, I mean. Okay? So again, it's a set of guidelines. Hindi siya something na you have to faithfully follow. So una, si single responsibility principle. So it is a class should only have a single responsibility. If a pickup class, ang responsibility niya is to pick up. To, para kapag mangyari kapag na-pick up siya and ano namang ano effects nun. Right? Obstacle. The only responsibility for an obstacle is to become an obstacle, to block or to affect the player. Right? And this is something na yung ginawa natin sa GAMPRG 1 and 2. It's something that we were trying to follow. Such as, that's why I've always told you guys to use event dispatchers kung naalala nyo. Because we didn't want the tile to be the one spawning the other tiles or whatever. We wanted tile to just be a tile. Okay? Same thing sa obstacle. You didn't want to kill, you didn't want the obstacle to, to restart the game. You don't want player to restart the game. Because that the responsibility of restarting the game is the game manager or the game mode. So that is single responsibility principle. So it gives your class a clear purpose in your program, never go beyond that scope, and also it is applicable for functions and methods. If you have a method na die, dapat wala dun yung pag restart because ang function niya is ang kung mamatay si player. Which is either mag-disappear siya, mag-spawn siya ng ng emitter, mga ganun. Right? Any questions here? Or clarification? Sige. Next, open, closed principles. So the entity should be open for extension but closed for modification. And force a program to write future-proof code. Modification in code should happen only where it is concerned. What does this mean? The idea of open close principle is that existing well-tested classes will need to be modified when something needs to be added. Pero yung pag-changing ng class can lead to problems or bugs, diba? So instead of changing the class, you simply want to extend the class. So it should be open. So following this principle is essential for writing code that is easy to maintain and revise. So your class complies with this principle if it is open for extension, meaning that a class's behavior can be extended, or closed for modification, meaning that the source code is set and cannot be changed. So it means add in scripts, extensions for what they can do, but not change it. Pwede, right? That could be. Better na mag-a-add ka na lang. Kasi, nangyayari is kapag na-open mo for modification, you might end up bloating your class. Ang dami nang nangyayari sa class na yun. And, wala. Pangit na ng code nyo. So, it should be open for extension instead, but closed for modifications. So, when you mean for extension, you can extend the class by either adding more functions or maybe adding making a child of it. Wait lang, nisip ko. Ayun. Hence, if you remember, sa mga objects natin mga obstacles natin sa outbreak, we did not set yung pag-burn or pag pag-burn or pag slow down ng player in just one class. We extended it by creating those child classes and doon natin nilalagay yung anumang mangyayari. Okay? Next, the Liskov substitution principle. So objects in the program should be replaceable with instances of their subtypes without altering the correctness of the program. So derived classes must be substitutable to their base classes. So achieved through proper inheritance and polymorphism. So this principle simply requires that every derived class should be substitutable for its parent class. So in a lot of ways, it's simply an extension of open-closed principle. Medyo parehas lang sila. So as it's a way of ensuring that derived classes extend the base class without changing its behavior. So following this principle helps to avoid unexpected consequences of changes and avoids having to open a closed class in order to make changes. So medyo Nakalink siya sa open-close principle. They're both supporting each other. Next, interface segregation principle. So no client should be forced to depend on methods it does not use. So many client-specific interfaces are better than one general-purpose interface. Prefer composition over inheritance, prefer decoupling over coupling. So this means that you don't want to just start with an existing interface and add new methods to it. So according to this principle, you should work to have many client-specific interfaces, avoiding the temptation having one big general purpose interface. So example nito is yung ginawa yung mga iba na what they did sa obstacle. Uh, since the other people they had the easier way out, meaning si player he had the burn, he had the slow. Technically hindi dapat kasi I mean it's not his responsibility, right? And not only that, it breaks this rule because yung class na yun, di ba talaga niya kailangan yun. So, a better way to do yung mga buffs or the debuffs, right, was to create um another API such as a buff system, mga ganun, or a buff uh, handler na component. All right. So this one, some people may not be following this, but it's kind of okay. Pero in the long run, baka may mga problema kayo. Finally, dependency inversion principle. So high-level modules should not depend on low-level modules. So both should depend on abstraction. So abstraction should not depend upon details. Details should depend upon abstraction. Scalable systems should always be abstracted. So one popular way to comply with this principle is through the use of the dependency inversion pattern. Although this method is not the only way to do so. So whatever method you choose to utilize, find a way to utilize that principle. Will make your code more flexible, agile, and reusable. This one again, very not all really follow this, which is understandable kasi medyo very specific na to. Right? Any questions here? Sige. So, where are the examples? Solid is too abstract and contextual. We need an actual program where it can be applied. So in this course, we'll be applying those principles once the problem arises. And it's not something talaga na I can show examples. Ma-encounter lang nyo to when you guys start creating project nyo. And then you'll find out na some principles are good to use. And mostly it's like yung pinaka useful is the single responsibility. Because yung palang clear. It should be clear to you when you start coding. Right? So, there's there's a fine line between everything. Never overdo it. You don't have to fully commit to using all these principles. So here, intuitiveness versus efficiency. So yung intuitiveness describes how easy and readable the code is. Yung mga iba, naglalagay sila ng mga comments, which is good. That's very intuitive. Problema lang is the amount of comments you put in there, right? So efficiency describes how fast the program runs. So increasing the efficiency might require to write unintuitive and messy code. Uh, may mga ganun na cases, yung code nyo is, sure, it works. And it's very, very optimized. The problem is, when other people try to read yung code na yun, it will take a while. It will take a while for them to understand. And if it will not take a while, they will never understand bakit nyo ginawa to. Right? So there's a trade-off with intuitiveness and efficiency. So do not optimize your code if there is no significant problem in performance. Start simple with intuitive code and mess with it when you do need it. So be aware of functions that has performance implications. So such as yung find object with tag or find object of type. Same thing sa Unreal, yung mga ganun na get all actors of class, ayun. Those are very inefficient. So mga ganun na cases, there's a way to go through that without having to use those. Next, abstraction versus concretion. So abstraction refers to the flexibility of the code, while concretion refers to how specific and hardwired the code is to another set of code. So overdoing abstraction can make it harder for the client to use the code. Improper abstraction is worse than having no abstraction at all. So imagine, ang dami mong nilagay na mga virtual sa 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 code nyo. Sure, it works. Problem is, when other people try to use it, minsan baka din na magets kung ano yung how it fully works. Kaya, ayun, may trade-off rin to. So, never over-design your architecture. Code architecture is made to solve problems and not create new ones. So if you need a bit of flexibility, then just apply a bit of it. You don't have to overdo it. Okay? So, in order to help you guys, ito madala naman to, is to use the rule of 3. So, as you code, you'll realize that a code is being duplicated. And matatempt ka para i-refactor. Kasi kita mo, oh, I could create a function to do this, to do that. And then, yun yung gagamitin nyo. So, only refactor lang if you see a code being duplicated 3 times. Kung ganun, then it's time to change yung code nyo para mas efficient. So do not refactor if there is no significant benefit. And make sure that the time it takes to refactor code will be worth it. So write your code in a way it can be refactored easily later. So again, matatempt kayo. Right? If you see something na parang, oh, I can do something better with this, matatempt kayo. Mag-refactor lang kayo kapag kailangan na kailangan. Because the time it takes for doing that, mag-waste siya. And it's gonna be used and mali mo, crunch time na kayo. Okay? So you don't have to always refactor right away. So controlling the power of design principles and patterns. Yun nga, comes with great responsibility on handling those. Ang problema nga natin with game programming. Game code has the same foundation as any programming, pero it is very different in the sense of how objects communicate with each other. Hindi siya parehas sa lahat ng mga programming. Game has a lot of global states. Right? Kung naalala nyo, yung game manager, may state siya either playing na siya or nasa menu or nasa settings, etc. Marami siyang global states. So traditional design principles do not like this, but we cannot really help it. So games can have drastic changes in a short amount of time. And it's too open-ended. Pretty sure na feel nyo naman to sa mga capstones. Lahat ng changes nyo, you're only given probably a few weeks to create to do your changes. Which is, in the sense of sa IT world, whatever. Not really the case. Most of the time naman, you're given enough time to make our changes. However, here is a game dev. We have to do it right away. So game is heavily event driven. One action can lead to another set of actions. So that's how our levels work, right? Okay, so far any questions? Next. So game consumes a lot of resource, which may force us to write messy but performant code. So ayun nga. Um sure we could have simply just spawned 1000 bullets, pero in order to make it efficient, we have to write a code na parang uh medyo messy nga siya, pero it works really well, which is yung object pooling. So component-based architecture is heavily used in games. So you don't really see that much component-based architecture. Actually, you don't see at all ang component-based architecture sa mga IT. It is kind of unique to us. Kasi this is a new approach which older principles and patterns cannot describe. So a lot of software design patterns is not compatible with game code. Some patterns that are considered bad actually work for games. So if you remember, may mga iba kasi na may isang tayong principle na um, it should not be a general purpose. Sometimes we actually need a class that's a general purpose, such as trying yung mga pag-singleton. I'm not sure if you guys have experienced that, pero in order for you to access some managers, you need to have a singleton that can access all the managers. Sa mga ganun. So yeah, it kind of breaks it, but it's helpful nga for us. So something, ayun. Considered bad action frames. Yep. So use design patterns responsibly. So again, design patterns cannot solve everything. So don't use a single screwdriver for everything. Only use design patterns when necessary. Sure, you can go create a object pooling for your game. Ang tanong, kailangan nyo ba? Sure, it's a very advanced thing. Ay, gumawa ko ng object pooling. Pero kung game nyo doesn't even need the amount of stuff to be spawned, it's useless. So use it responsibly. Never follow design pattern religiously. Exceptions happen a lot. So patterns and principles are means to an end, not an end itself. The end is maintainability. The rule of thumb is to set general principles at first, then bend them when the need arises. Okay? So again, design patterns. Iba yung design patterns sa design principles. So, ayun nga, singleton, object pooling. Ayun. Here we go. The singleton pattern as an example. So most will say singleton pattern is bad kasi kailangan nyo maging static. Because they say having a static variable is bad because the value can always change, whatever. So the singleton pattern is bad only when used where it shouldn't be. Singleton allows programmers to have a fast and easy access to global objects, which is very common in games. The correct interpretation is that singleton pattern is easily misused and overused. So may proper way. May proper way talaga to follow singleton. Ang iba lang kasi is they use it for everything and doon nagiging messy yung code. Kasi kung na-follow nyo lang yung single pattern and di nyo na-follow ang design principles, that's when problems arise. So if used properly, it gives you a big advantage. There are alternatives to singleton pattern, but they tend to be too complicated. Ayan. So, questions? Or may gusto ba kayong ibang pattern? As example. Wala naman. May nakagamit pa ng singleton pattern? Or singleton manager, whatever, sa game nyo? Did iOS or Android programming ever teach you singleton? GameNet. Si Sir Dave. Ayan. So, if you've seen it, that maybe na-time kayo na, oh, siguro ito rin pwede maging singleton. Oh, siguro ito rin pwede ito maging singleton. So, yan yung worry with, using singleton. There's a proper way to use it. Usually, ang ginagamit namin for singleton is for managers. So, game manager, audio manager, scene manager, ayun. We use them as a singleton because there can only be one of it sa game nyo. Alright. So, yun. Just one of the other patterns there that will be used. So, yun lang. That's it lang for code architecture. Again, these are just guidelines lang. Guidelines for you to uh, help you sa code nyo para hindi siya masyadong messy or it's easy for your fellow programmer to understand. But then again, it's not something that you should faithfully follow. Okay? Any questions? Clarification? None? Sige. Kung wala, that's just it for today lang naman. Ang next topic naman natin for for next week would be robust classes. That will be for next week. Wait lang, let me just double check. Yeah, next week. Online? Depende. I-poll ko ulit. Kasi yung iba, gusto na mag face to face. Siguro ipo-poll ko na lang kung gusto niyo ba para ma-check stuff. Pwede. Pwede rin kayo mag-request online kung gusto niyo ipa-check. Ah, Inisip ko is kapag nag-face to face tayo, 6 to 40 to 7 would be lecture. Afterwards, we'll just be checking ng progress. No. Pwede. Sige. Check natin. Try natin next week face to face. That way I can check all the milestones and all the HCD. Actually, pwede rin kayo gumawa ng milestones there na. Kung di pa kayo nagpapacheck ng HCD. Okay? Sige. Any questions again? Or clarification? None? None. So yeah, that's it lang for today. Kung may papacheck ba ng HCD or ng milestone, you can stay here. You can leave muna. Yung iba, you guys can go. Right? So, see you all next week. And I hope you guys have learned something